Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to do mirror embroidery, mirror work, Shisha stitch. It's the stitches that I use to get these little mirrors to sit firmly. It's used extensively in embroidery throughout India. The thing with these little mirrors is that they're not stuck on, there's no holes, there's nothing holding them. See, they're just little mirror discs. So we need to create this border that holds them so the mirror sits firmly in behind this frame, called Shisha stitch. To do this sort of work, all you need is some firmly woven fabric, a calico, quilter's muslin, a homespun cotton, something like that, nice and dense in the weave to hold it. You need your little mirror discs. These are really lovely and thin, as you can see. You'll need your needle, and then you need some sort of thread. You can use a pearl cotton, a number 12, or maybe even an 8 that's a little bit thicker. You can use your stranded cotton floss. I would use for these size mirrors. These mirrors are about 12 millimeters or half an inch. I would use 2 or maybe 3 strands of floss for that. You can also use a soft cotton, such as a Danish flower thread, or some of the soft cotton, the floche, makes a really lovely edge as well. When you start out, I do recommend you use an embroidery hoop. For this, you don't need to bind the inside ring, and you don't need to keep your fabric super tight. The purpose of the hoop is just to help you hold the fabric and control it while you're attaching your mirrors. As you get more practice, you can easily stitch this sort of embroidery just holding your fabric in the hand. So the first thing I'm going to do is frame up the piece, ready to get started, like so, and then you are ready to go. So here we have our mirror ready to be attached to our fabric. There's nothing holding these guys, they're just little thin discs of glass. So we have to stitch a border of some kind around the edge of it to hold them securely in place. I do start my threads with a knot on the end. I figure that having a knot in under a firm surface like a mirror is not going to ever show on the front. Of course, if you're stitching on a really sheer fabric and you're not going to be backing it in any way, then I would not start with a knot on the wrong side. So I bring my thread to the front directly below where the mirror is going to go, and even though I do have a knot on my thread, I will still take a couple of little pin stitches just to anchor that, make sure that thread is anchored securely. So a pin stitch is a tiny little back stitch that just grabs 1 or 2 fabric threads, and what that does means that if the knot for some reason does work itself undone down the track, your stitching is not going to come undone because it's really these stitches that are securing it. Placing my mirror over the top of that, and then I need to hold it securely in place. So especially if you're doing a pattern, you don't want it to shift from this position. So I'll place my finger over the top, and I want the stitches in my grid to be roughly each stitch approximately a third onto the mirror. They're going to be placed in a tic-tac-toe pattern to hold the mirror in place while we do the border stitching later on. First stitch to the front at the top left of my mirror. Place a stitch straight across, and this is where you'll be holding this in place with just with your finger so it doesn't slip out of position. To the back directly across the mirror, holding it securely in place here. And we'll then take a second stitch. You can see how easily this slips, holding that in place, and then my second stitch will go in the opposite direction, again approximately a third onto the mirror. So this first stitch from top to bottom, second stitch from below the lower edge of the mirror to the top. These stitches are placed quite snug into around the edge of the mirror, so they're kind of holding right down tight. We've gone to the back at the upper right. We now need to place the 2 horizontal bars of this tic-tac-toe grid that will hold our mirror in place. Gone to the back upper right. I will come to the front on the left hand edge of the mirror, so that underneath my thread is traveling from here to here, so that I get proper tension on it. Bring my thread needle to the front, to the left, and my tic-tac-toe, the upper horizontal bar is going to go sit along here. To lock it in place so it doesn't shift, I will place my thread above the line I'm stitching, or the bar I'm stitching, and with my needle pointing towards the side where the thread is coming out, I will wrap it in around the first bar. That just will lock this bar in place. And I repeat that around the second bar, so the thread goes above where my needle is going to be, and I take my needle under the second bar, pointing to the edge where my thread is coming out through the fabric. Pull that one relatively firm. I do want these stitches to be tight but not distort the grid. And then I go to the back on the opposite side in snug. You can see the needle is right in touching the edge of my mirror, so that my stitches will be firm. I will then repeat that for a bar across the lower third of the mirror. So I will come to the front on the right hand side, so the same side where I took my needle to the back. And this time, because I'm on the lower half of my mirror, I will have the thread below. Again, needle pointing back in the direction where the thread is coming out. One, and repeat that, so the thread below and needle pointing back in the direction where the thread is coming out. Pull these tight, and you can see how, because these ones are in there, manipulate a little bit so we have a nice firm grid. To the back on the other side of the mirror, and that's our grid that will be holding it while we do the actual Shisha stitch border. You would normally continue for the border with this same thread that you have in the needle. I'm going to change the color just so that you can see what's happening. So I have changed my thread. I have also marked where we initially started with the grid, which is up here, and that's important as to where we start the next stage, the mirrors, the Shisha stitches that are going to create the frame holding this in place nicely. This is where we finished. So when you're using the same thread, you will jump into this quarter point next to your first stitch. You will then rotate your hoop. It's easiest if you stitch this with the edge you're covering point towards you. So I shall gently do this so we don't get seasick. There we go. So the starting point for the border stitches will be with the needle towards you. And this time the needle is coming out just a really narrow distance from the edge of the mirror, not right in tight this time. Bring that to the front. I then I work in a clockwise direction, so I'll loop my thread in a clockwise direction around the mirror and then slide my needle under the stitches in the grid at the first intersecting point, and that will help just anchor your border stitches. Take that through, then I'll hold my thread again in the direction I'm going, so I tend to clamp that down just under my left thumb straight away, and I take my thread to the needle to the back just behind the emerging thread. So the thread is coming out at that point and my needle is just behind it. I'll take that through to the back, leaving a loop on the right side, and coming to the front inside that thread loop, parallel to the mirror edge, a little further along. In here, take the needle through so that my stitch is anchoring around the needle, the loop in the original thread. Again, loop forward in the direction you're going. Take your needle under the grid. Once you pass the quarter points, you will only be going under one thread. Again, the needle is over the thread loop. Take it two until it anchors around the grid. And now we have to find the loop that holds our previous chain along the edge. So I might take my needle to the back. So it's this one in here, see that where the thread is resting on the fabric along here. I want to go to the back inside that and to the front, a little further along, parallel to the edge of the mirror, and not in close to it, or not in right on the edge of the mirror, then you will be cutting into the thread from the back. So just a little bit further along, pull it two, and pull them two, so you pull away from the edge. If we pull up this way, the stitch is going to flip closed, so we need to pull it. Always pull the thread through in the direction you're going. Loop the thread in the direction you're traveling. Needle under the grid. Take it two. So that was around our grid stitches. And then I'll find the previous chain, which is this one here. It's resting on the fabric. We want to go inside that. And then to the front, a little bit further along the edge. See how my needle is not completely touching the edge of the mirror. It's just a short distance away. Pull that through, and again I'm pulling out away from the edge so that my stitch will sit nice and flat. And you continue doing that all the way around. So every second stitch in around your grid, every second stitch finding the previous chain in here, and to the front, a little further along the edge of the mirror, pull the stitch to, pulling away from the edge and a little bit in the direction you're going. When you're stitching this with the hoop held in your hand, you'll rotate the hoop as you go. So I'm going to quickly whisk around here and show you how we join the circle at the end. So I have stitched all the way around the mirror, and as you can see, the aim is to have this inside edge nicely covered. Here you can see little specks of the grid underneath. Clearly, if you're stitching as you would with the same thread, the same color for both the grid and the border stitches afterwards, you won't have that little things showing up there. So what we're going to try and do is join this circle neatly. So in all the research I did, I could not find instructions anywhere as to how we will join this circle without getting a visible anchoring stitch at the end. So what I worked out what we'll do is, when I can see I've only got room for one more stitch here, see there's just a tiny gap, we will do our last stitch in around the grid like you normally would, taking it from the inside out. Take your needle through as such, and that's closed the circle on the inside. Now if we just anchor that down and take the needle to the back there, you will get a little unsightly dot or stitch, and you'll see where the starting and finishing point of your circle is. On the other hand, if we find in here the very first chain in our edging stitches, let's see if we flip it up, you can see it a bit better for the light. So right in here, this edge stitch, I will take my needle and I will rotate it so I use the eye end, only so that I don't accidentally split any stitches. I'll take the eye end of my thread needle under that first stitch in the circle, pull it to, and that anchors my stitch that goes around the grid, and I then take my needle to the back inside the previous chain stitch, this one here, just like you've been doing all the way around, and I will take it to the back here, and now we have a nice invisible join in the edge and our mirror is finished. So with this, getting the tension and the spacing of your stitches correct, as with any other embroidery, it takes practice, so I hope you'll have fun with it, and yeah, attach some mirrors to whatever else you're doing. Enjoy.